I'm a Jewish artist, and I need your help. Everybody on this side of the room, please make a frame with your fingers, hold it up, and fill it with some nice Jewish art. What do you see? Portraits of artists standing next to rabbis, beautiful Judaica that you want to touch and use, or the occasional abstract picture that captures the Jewish experience of the painter. Now, everyone over here, it's your turn. Make a frame, hold it up, and fill that with contemporary art. What does that look like? Maybe fields of lightning rods that capture the power of the sky, or a mother who watched her child grow and put evidence of that growth in the gallery. That stuff doesn't really fit in these frames now, does it? Thanks for making frames. You can put your hands down now. Jewish art might show up in Jewish museums or in people's homes. Contemporary art might show up on the city street or way out in the desert. Some art that may be made tomorrow, what will that look like? I don't know. Chances are some of that might show up in that alternative art space, that building that used to be a factory. That's where I want Jewish art to be. I don't want to know what it's going to look like. I want the artists to surprise us. I want them to do things unexpected. But how do they do that? What's holding them back? And why do we keep putting Jewish art back in a frame? Another question might be, how did contemporary art escape the museum? How did it wind up way out in the desert or on the city street? Well, that took a while, and the famous art critic Harold Rosenberg noticed that things started to change. He saw that artists weren't making pictures of bowls of fruit sitting on rickety tables about to collapse, or people with two noses. Rather, he saw artists showing us their process. They'd roll canvas out across the floor and dribble the paint on it. It was active and exciting, and for him, meaningful. And then when this art critic, Harold Rosenberg, was asked about Jewish art, what did he say? He talked about subject matter and symbolism, and if the artist was Jewish. What happened to that exciting new way of looking at art? Rosenberg didn't change his mind. He looked at Jewish art one way and everything else the other. But we can bring these things together. What would it be like for us to think about an active Jewish process in art making? Well, Judaism has a lot to say about process. Think about matzah for a minute. To make matzah, you mix flour and water, knead it together, roll it out flat, get it in the oven really fast, all in under 18 minutes, otherwise it starts to rise and it's no good for Passover. Or think about the sukkah, that three-walled booth with the flat roof. The Talmud has a lot to say about how to build that. And there are these peculiar building codes. The walls don't have to touch the floor. When you're inside, you need to see the night sky through the ceiling. And the ceiling needs to be made out of schach, organic material that's cut from the ground. So clearly, these are Jewish process. We're being told how to make things and do things. And each of these examples relates to particular holidays. But is there some overarching idea, a broader discussion about process that Judaism can share with us? And matzah is made out of a particular kind of flour, and the schach at the top of the sukkah has to be organic. So maybe Judaism has something to say about materials too. To answer and discover the answers to these questions, we probably have to talk about something we're all a little bit familiar with, and that's Shabbat. And when we bring these questions to Shabbat, we might learn something about Shabbat that we've overlooked for a while. Shabbat is thought of as the day of rest. God worked for 6 days and rested on the seventh, and we're commanded to do the same thing. But the rabbis didn't command us to lie on the couch all day long on a Saturday afternoon when it's raining, as often as I want to do that. Rather, they gave us a definition of work. They called it the melachot, 39 specific creative activities. These were all the things the Israelites had to do when they built that Mishkan, that portable synagogue they had with them in the desert. All of the melachot described the different tasks. And this temple was incredibly important. In the inside was the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest would go on Yom Kippur. And in that space was the Ark of the Covenant that held the tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, the closest physical thing to the divine we might ever have. What do we know about the building? It's fairly rectangular. We know some things about what it looked like and how it was furnished. But we also know a lot about how it was made. That the walls were made of wooden posts that were covered in gold and fit into sockets in the ground. that the ceiling was made of layers of fabric, and some of that fabric was made of linen, just like the priestly garments. The melachot are the tasks required, not only to make the posts and set them up so they're in the right place and they don't fall over, but to make all the stuff, particularly that linen fabric. Now, I'm going to tell you how to make linen, and bear with me for a second, because the process is actually, for me as an artist, interesting, but also important to discuss or figure out what Judaism has to say about making and creativity. And each step of the process of making linen was one of those melachot, those activities we refrain from on the Sabbath. So, to make linen, you plant flax seeds, let it grow, harvest the stalks, comb out the stalks to find the soft center on the inside of that straw, spin that into yarn, and then finally weave it together. Each step is discussed by the rabbis, and each step adds complexity as you follow along that assembly line. Really, it's about finishing the product, and it's also about each of those steps. The tailor can't work without the weaver. The weaver can't work without the spinner, and the spinner can't do the work without the farmer. Everything's independent, but everything is interrelated. And often we think of the end product, making the linen, making the clothing. But the farmer may not be thinking about that. He may be thinking about the harvest. And the spinner may be not thinking about that. They're thinking about the yarn. So each stage also has a moment of completion. And that's the part of Shabbat we often overlook. Many people think of Shabbat as the day of rest. You work on Friday, you rest on Saturday, and you pick up again on Monday morning, whatever it is you were doing. But that's not what God did. God finished his work. He didn't make Adam on Friday and leave Eve for Sunday morning. And the priests certainly didn't put up half the Mishkan and say, that's good enough for now. Everything needed to be done. Creation happens. God then sees what he made and calls it good. That moment of recognition that everything is done, I call the Shabbat moment. Then Shabbat can come. And I look for that moment often when I'm making artworks. It's not a matter of necessarily working too hard, but understanding that the material and the process come together and unify into a new thing. The Shabbat moment often I feel when I lift the brush for that last moment and I know that it's finished. So let me tell you about my process making art. If you come to my studio, I would show you around, and I would show you colors and paints, paper and canvas. I'd also show you a row of books with travel guides and art books, and several volumes of Talmud. I enjoy taking the ideas from Talmud and turning them into art materials. Well, how do I do that? Most of the time, I make paintings, and paint can be made from all sorts of materials: oil, milk, eggs, all sorts of things. And milk is part of a very traditional material called milk paint, and you may see barns painted with it along the highway. Milk, for me, also has an association with the rules of kashrut. So I take those rules and I follow them to make some materials. I made kosher paints and non-kosher or treif paints. To make these things, I add vinegar to milk and let them separate into the curd and the whey. The curd is the cottage cheese part. After that, I rinse it off and dry it out, and then add pigments, things that come from the ground, things that are called terre verte or burnt sienna, things that are warm mud colors generally. And then for the treif paints, I start with that same curd product, and I add colors that I wouldn't eat. Carmine red means blood red, and it comes from dried, desiccated, pulverized cochineal beetles. So I think of my whole process as a Jewish one: making the materials, using them, and then coming to this new union of those two things, and hopefully feeling the Shabbat moment. Now, contemporary Jewish art has this opportunity to show you that moment, to show the process in the artworks. But it would be kind of silly to think that Shabbat is just for the artists and designers out there, people who make stuff. Shabbat is for everybody. So let me ask you, what are your creative activities? And how do you arrange them to create a process? And the hardest part might be, when do you know that you're done? You might work with data, and you might work with a student. You analyze the data to look for an answer, and you instruct the child. That last moment might be finding an answer from the data, or seeing that the child can now do something independently of you that they couldn't do before. Often that work then continues. Monday morning comes, you keep going. But if you were to take a moment to find that Shabbat moment, what would you find? I'd like you also to think about those things and share them with somebody else. Your materials, however abstract they might be, the process that you use, and then the finished state. When you're at a dinner party, describe this to your peers. When you're at a conference, tell them about what you do in this light. The artists are trying to communicate that to you as well in their work. But it's hard to see it in one of my paintings. I need extra help. I need the curator to fill a room of pictures so that you can see the change over a period of time, or the art historian to fill a book with information so you can also read about it over a period of chapters. Even the critic, who writes about first impressions, gets the conversation started. So to me, Jewish creativity is taking a material and a process and making this new union, that Shabbat moment. There are artists out there who are surprising, and they're doing unusual things. There's a fellow who wrapped his arm with text, and the letters got pressed into his skin. And there's another group of artists who laid speakers down a dry riverbed. The speakers played the sound of running water. Imagine being in a dead landscape, nothing is growing, and hearing the sound of life. These artworks show us the material, and they show us what was done. But when those two things come together, something new happens. These artworks don't fit in that frame. In fact, the frame tells us only really to look at the picture, what's in the picture. What does Jewish art look like? This is really the wrong way to think about things. And in fact, we don't need this at all. What we should be thinking about is, how is contemporary Jewish art going to be made? Thank you.